Good morning, everyone. I wonder, you're here to talk about water security, and I wonder how many people in here, when was the last time you thought about water this morning? Was it when you brushed your teeth or made your coffee? Is it something that you're thinking about all the time before you walked into this session? But I think for the vast majority of people, that is not something that they're thinking about all the time. And when you do think about it, probably it's about the water that you're drinking. Did I have enough to make tea this morning? And so before we start anything else, I'm just going to do a rapid fire question to our panelists, just to say, give another example of where we're using water that people might not be thinking about besides drinking water. So we're just going to do it super quick. Sophie with Planeteer.
Ooh, let's do it. I most recently invested in a company that uses wastewater on animal farms to assess for disease vectors.
Oh. Very cool. Yeah, Martijn.
And did you use that this morning?
I definitely did not assess the waste vectors in the water this morning.
Okay.
Was this a this morning thing? This morning I thought about how small the cups in France are for water drinking.
It's and the coffee cups as well. So I was thinking about this. We had a bit of pre-warning, so that was good. And I thought, so what was the thing with water that I did that my fellow panelists will enjoy most? And obviously, I took a shower this morning. But then I also used soap and deodorant. And you might not think that there's water in there, but actually there is.
Great. Fajer.
Yeah, for me, it's it's a depressing topic, but we don't think about how much our microchip manufacturing, AI data centers rely on not just the cooling, but also just to make the chips. You can't do that today with using tremendous amounts of water for the cooling, but for the running and the manufacturing. So water is key to us sitting here using these screens and talking about AI all the time.
If you like your phone, you better want us to have some water. And Raúl.
Another example is the creation of green hydrogen. Okay, that's very related with green industries. And for example, the cooling of the data centers, that's also related with this deep tech forum.
Yeah, great. Thanks, y'all. So hopefully that means you're thinking a little bit broader about it. And so just to set the stage a little bit, what are we talking about when we talk about water security? Yes, we're talking about making sure that we have the capacity to make sure that everybody has access to safe, affordable, adequate drinking water, sanitation for hygiene for their basic needs. But we're also thinking about whether our ecosystems have enough that we need, to provide us with fresh water, but also to keep our ecosystems working and sustained. We're talking about how resilient we are to any waterborne diseases, to water-related disasters. And we're also thinking about all the water we need for the economy, for energy production, food production, for industry, for transportation, all of those things. And so I'm just so lucky to be here on this panel with people who have been thinking about water and think about it every day. Just by quick background, I most recently was working in the Biden administration in the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Water. So this is definitely an area I've been thinking a lot about too. And so let's just kick it off. We're in a bit of a water crisis. And one of the things that we have heard about is that by the year 2030, which sounds like the future, but is, hello, tomorrow, we think that the global demand for fresh water will exceed our supply by 40%. That's in 5 years. And yet at the same time, we also say holy gosh, the planet is covered by water. Why isn't desalination? Let's just use the ocean water to solve our problem. And so I'm going to turn it to Martijn with Desolenator first. I know that environmental groups maybe have some controversies and concerns with desalination. So can you tell us just a little bit about that in general, and then what you see in this area?
Yeah, and of course, we have the solution for that. It's true that the world is covered with water, and 97.5% of that is salt water. So you can't drink it, unfortunately. So then there's 2.5% left, and you might think, yay, that's actually also a lot of water. But if you actually look at that, most of that water is captured in ice. So it's also not available for us as drinking water or for all of the other uses that we have for water. So it's less than 1% of all of the water that we see around us is actually available for drinking water. And then desalination becomes something that is just a no-brainer to go after. But when you do that, obviously, if you take the salt out of the water, that salt has to go somewhere again. And this is where I'm happy that Fajer is between me and Raúl, because Raúl is in RO, and that's actually a competitor of the technology that we use. Because we say, well, when you do RO, you need all kinds of chemicals to make sure that the membranes don't clog up. And those chemicals land in what we call the brine, so that's like the concentrated salt solution. And if you put that back into the ocean, then it may harm marine life. What you also see in some areas like the Arabian Gulf, where a lot of desalination is going on, is that the salt levels of the sea are going up and you create marine deserts. So it's a great technology, desalination, but it has also some downsides, and you need to give that some thought as you try to tackle it.
So how are you tackling it?
Well, we use the energy from the sun. And so we use thermal desalination, which essentially means like we all do when we make our teas in the morning. You boil water, the vapor goes up, we capture that vapor, and then we have ultra-pure water. And we do it via multiple effects. It is under a vacuum, so it doesn't need to be all the way up to 100 degrees, which is a bit more energy efficient. And what comes out is that very pure water. What goes back into the ocean, because you don't need any chemicals, is basically just salt, which you can dilute a little bit and then turn it back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So now we have, hopefully a future source of more fresh water, but right now we have our own fresh water, and the problem is we often find that it's contaminated with all kinds of pollution. And one of them that hopefully everybody has heard about is PFAS, otherwise known as the forever chemicals. These chemicals that have such a strong bond that makes them super useful to be water resistant and stain resistant, also makes them incredibly difficult to break down, and we're finding them in all across the globe. Polar bears have PFAS in their bodies. And as Martijn has mentioned, we have membrane technology, things that can remove it from the water, but that isn't the cure-all. So Fajer, I want to turn it to you, CEO and co-founder of Oxyle, and just talk a little bit about, what do we do about when we do find this pollution in the water that we are using right now?
Yeah, so the conventional methods of treating forever chemicals, or PFAS, as they're known scientifically, has been, you absorb them or you filter them out, right? So you just take a bunch of activated carbon, or you take RO or other membrane filters, nanofiltration as well, not just to shit on RO. There are other ways of also to take them out, but the problem is you create a secondary waste then, right? So you create reject water, you create absorbed materials that is now super contaminated with the saturated toxic PFAS waste, which still needs to be taken care of. And today, the only solution for that is you send that for incineration, you send that for burning at very low temperatures where you actually don't burn these chemicals. So you actually release them back into the air. And that's why we have PFAS now all over the world in all the measured samples in the rainwater today, all over the world. So that's definitely a cycle that's not sustainable. They cannot go on like this because our resilience on, or our sustenance on PFAS is not going anywhere, right? So the logical thing, I would assume, for everyone to think would be, let's not absorb, let's not create a secondary waste, let's actually destroy these chemicals if we can somehow, right? That is the sustainable answer to that solution. And I'm not the only one thinking that. We have been thinking that as a society for a while. The problem with destroying some of the hardest things to destroy, the CF bonds in PFAS, it is the hardest bonds chemically to destroy. That's why also they're so resilient. The statement of, being as strong as Teflon, that's the thing. Teflon is PFAS, right? So it's very, very difficult to break them, which means anything that breaks them is very energy intensive. So then you end up creating technology which can destroy them, but you can't scale them, you can't pay for them. The OPEX is really high. So the answer to this problem of not creating a secondary waste is to destroy them in a chemical oxidation reduction process, while also making sure you can scale that and it's affordable. And that's what we do at Oxyle.
Great. Raúl, I feel like you've been taking a beating, so let me give you a chance. So what other, you're with Tadagua, you're a head engineer, y'all are building big, huge water projects, water treatment, things like that. What about you? What are you seeing as technologies that can help us address this water security issue?
A part of Arrow. I'm a fan of Arrow, okay, and we are trying we are getting some desalination plants almost without chemicals. It's very interesting. But a part of this, we trust on the IoT, okay, the digitalization of the water networks, because one of the critical points is to save water. Okay, not only to be more efficient, but also save water and avoid losses. So digitalization of networks with every measurement point in the network is critical for us. So one point is this. Another one that we are implementing is the digital twins and the I/O on the plants that we are operating. Okay, in terms with two objectives. One is to increase the efficiency of the plants. Okay, we need to learn about all the historical data we have for each plant and for the complete set of plants, and try to foresee the next problems that we will have. Okay, we try to include the foreseeing capabilities of the digital twin in terms of the predictable maintenance. With this, we can avoid shutdown of the plants and some periods of lack of supply because we are talking about a critical supply, the drinking water. We cannot live without water. So maybe these 2 points, and also another one that I think is very, very critical is the blockchain, because for this supply, we need the conscience of all the people that we are talking about open point with transparency, and the people can trust on the companies, and the people are managing the plants. So the blockchain of all the data in the water cycle also is critical, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So, you've talked about, we all need drinking water. So just a few little stats that I've got. So the UN says that there are 5.5 billion people on this planet who do not have access to safely managed water. And there's 800 million who have no access to basic drinking water at all. And then when we talked about chip manufacturing, one chip manufacturing facility can use up to 10 million gallons, that's 45 million liters, because I did the conversion, of ultra pure water every day, which is a lot every day. And these cooling towers can use up to 9 liters, or 2 gallons for the Americans here, for every kilowatt hour of energy that's used. So that is a lot. And we also think about, when we think about our climate change crisis, you really see that as water stress, right? Your hurricanes, your wildfires, drought, flood. Climate stress is really seen as water stress. So Sophie, you're a managing founder at Planeteer, and you also do this amazing newsletter around climate tech. So surely in all the things that you've seen, we must be seeing lots of water innovation happening as people are trying to address climate. Can you tell me about what you see?
Surely, right?
Surely.
And yet, not so much. Perhaps a helpful framing context. When we talk about climate tech, as we've done, every week for the past 5 years or so through this newsletter called Climate Tech VC. It's literally on the label. One of the things that we do with that publication is we track every transaction that happens in this broader climate tech space, and therefore the onus is on us to define, well, what is a climate technology? And as we were preparing for this conversation, we were thinking about, where does water kind of fit into that? And in fact, the way that we see the ecosystem, we don't separate out water as its own industry, right? It's a subset and a theme and a risk and an opportunity, right, that overlays many of these other industrial segments. And so I was thinking about, where do we identify, how have we tagged those water companies that sit within climate? And it's everywhere, right? It's from energy, hydrogen production. It's from transportation, battery production. It's definitely in industrials with wastewater management, climate intelligence with, managing flooding and drought risks. It's certainly in built environment with the drinking water that we're reliant on, day to day ourselves. But the place where we're increasingly seeing water crop up is related to risk, to be honest. And so there's a bit of a shift here in this broader climate space from climate tech is a somewhat new word, right? We've really been using it in force for the past 5, 6, 7 years or so. And before we were calling this industry clean tech. And clean tech is a bit to mitigation. We expanded out into other opportunity vectors like, carbon removal, or talking about alternative meats and proteins, or on the edge of the market. And now my perspective is that we're needing to live within a reality of perhaps a 3-degree warmer, weirder, more dynamic, wetter, drier world. And within that, I think that water is going to be a major area of focus for folks, whether they like it or not. It will, the lack of it or the overabundance of it, the risk of it, runs through many of the themes that we're talking about at broader kind of Hello Tomorrow topics. From our small, portfolio, we're looking at water as a dramatic area of interest, and we're watching with great interest, right? How do other climate-specific funds, how do other deep tech funds, how do generalist funds start to incorporate a real theme of water investing into how they deploy capital?
Yeah, and so I guess to any of y'all, what do you see as what can help kind of drive this conversation further? How do we expand more and have more of this innovation in this area?
Well, one of the things that I think will help is if people wake up to the reality that currently there's not enough water to go around, not only for people who need it for drinking water, but also in industry. And that's a bit of a pivot that we made as a business, because originally when we started, the idea was we take the energy from the sun, both the electricity and the heat, and we use that in order to power a device that gives you 20 liters of water. So a household module is what we called it. But we saw that that's incredibly difficult to scale with, especially for a startup, because you need to start manufacturing, you need to distribute it, etc. And then actually we started looking at, well, what other uses for our technology could we get to that are easier to tap into? And that's where industry came in focus. And you gave a couple of examples earlier of how crucial water is for many, many different industries. And what surprises me, so I have a commercial role in our company. What surprises me is that I used to work in the energy industry, and there the topic of stranded assets. So you build something, but you can't actually continue to operate it because you don't have what you need in order to sustain it. That whole topic of stranded assets is not yet at the forefront of business discussions. And it is a huge strategic risk. Because if you don't have your water, then you won't be able to operate, whether you're bottling something, whether you're a data center, doesn't really matter. You just can't operate your business. So I think we need to talk about that more.
So I completely echo that point as well. And I think when it comes to why don't we see enough innovation in water, I think the conversation starts a little bit higher for me. It's like, have we created the right fertile ground for us to see enough innovation, right? Because if you have a great market, a booming market, you will see innovation, you will see more risk takers. So for me, I go to the same points around raising awareness around water. When we talk about awareness about global warming, I think we did a great job by visualizing the impact of it, so people understand what happens when you don't have. What happens if you have 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature to the oceans? You have these beautiful visuals of with or without, the coral reefs are dead. You see that, you can't unsee it, and then you know the importance of it. I think we can do a good job as a society as well to create visuals like that. So what happens if you keep polluting the way we are polluting and using and depleting, what happens to a city like Indonesia, or what happens in California, where you need to have all these semiconductor companies there. So just creating those visuals explain what happens, and then by doing that, putting a price on water. Like what's missing for me is water has no price today. So why would you want to invest in a commodity, in a resource that is supposed to not have a price? And that is the biggest challenge startups feel today, where our investors, our customers ask us, this should be a human right. So why would you want to make money off it? But the conversation is so different. We are not talking about treating, clean water and making it ultra pure for NGO purposes. We're talking about toxic water that is so heavily contaminated, that has been contaminated for greed and for making profits, which the taxpayers would have to fund if there is no price on it. So I think for me, the most important thing to see innovation, and innovation will come, We have a lot of smart people all over the world, but we need to create the fertile ground by putting a price on water and raising awareness very concretely. What happens to our world when there is no water that is fresh anymore? I think that's the most important thing for me first.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree in some way with your position. I think the communication and education is critical. The people needs to know the problem of the water, the necessity of the water for all the process of the life, okay, not only drinking, but also our way of life and the treatment and everything related with the technology. We need water and sometimes ultra pure water, but also in a positive way. Okay, we have a problem, we have a climate change, we have a lot of necessities and increasing necessity of water, but we have a technology. We have the capability to treat it and to solve the problem. So maybe with this positive aspect, okay, we have the problem, we have the solution, please do that. And also putting the correct price to the water, okay, paying for the water is critical, okay, because the people needs to know that they are using a scarce resource, okay, very scarce resource that has a cost, the treatment, the treatment for purification and the treatment for the wastewater treatment, okay. So in this case, we can also reduce a little bit the water request. And also another point is the open innovation, okay. As a critical sector, the water, some of the critical figures are hidden, okay. And most administration keep the figures in their reports, in their data, but not share with the rest of the environment. And this is, in my opinion, that this is harming the developing of the new technologies and applying the new technologies for the rest of the world, okay? Because some of the administration of the water sectors, okay, has a lot of data that are not sharing with the rest of us. So we cannot know if this technology is good or not, or we can apply or not in some cases.
And that also links directly to the point that was made about pricing the water at the right level. Because if water is subsidized, which in most countries it is, people don't actually see the value of the water that they have. They pay for it through their tax, and then we come, so this is a bit of a pity party, humor me for a moment, but we come with our technology, which is a little bit more expensive currently because we're still scaling, and they compare it to their current water bill and they say, well, but that's more expensive, so we won't do that. And what they don't see is that there's a lot of that hidden cost that Raúl mentioned that is actually factored in, but it's hidden, you don't see it.
Yep, I agree. And you can see that people always say that I cannot pay more for the water. Yeah. Really? Really? You cannot pay more for the water, but you can pay for a last iPhone, my friend? No. Maybe you need the water. Maybe you not need the last iPhone, but you need the water. And you have to pay for that because we need to put a lot of energy, a lot of innovation in this water. So I think this should be part of the public conversation.
Yeah.
Ideally, you can have water and the iPhone, or so my consumptive capitalist hope lives on. But within that, from the investor vantage, we are lucky to meet so many amazing people building in this space. But often there's two. When I think about reasons that it's hard to participate as an early stage investor in some of these business models, two things rise to the top. One being particularly in more nature-based opportunities or maybe carbon removal related to ocean tech, of which there's a ton of innovation and genuinely really interesting opportunities there. The challenge is that these are often open systems rather than closed systems, right? So from a scientific perspective, it ultimately comes down to it's very difficult to know all of the levers and attribution and therefore measurement, verification and reporting that goes into connecting value back to that innovation. And so it's hard to underwrite that purely from a MRV perspective. So we come up against that time and time again. And then, essentially, can we pay you for the service that you're providing? Can we prove that you're providing the service? And then the second piece is selling these solutions often requires deep partnership with complicated customers, utilities, right? Huge corporates, municipalities, people that don't like to pay extra or pay anything at all, or customers, consumers, right, who are undereducated. And that's pushing a boulder uphill, right? When you have to do education, and these are concentrated, complicated customer types, and I think that that's a challenge, but one that water-specific entrepreneurs perhaps are well, placed to overcome. They might come from industry themselves, and once you've attained those customers, they tend to be huge contracts, sticky, and a real moat.
I mean, just to add on to that, the second point you mentioned, it's something that resonates with me so much as well, because you're bringing a completely new solution that they've never seen before. So that's always something that makes people nervous to try something. So you need the first water champions as customers who have tried everything. They don't like what they see, so they want to take a risk with something new. But the second element is now we're talking about water, which is something we consume, right? So this other risk element of is that safe? Do we have future risks in the future when we do some new treatments or new assays to make sure the water is biologically safe and healthy? So that's the second element of risk, which is it's not just the waste you're treating, it's another thing you're injecting into the groundwater resource or lakes and rivers. Are you creating a future problem, which then again makes people sort of resistant to try? And if you are bringing up a new solution and no one wants to take the first bet on you to try and deploy, as a VC, you want to see more of that traction. As an entrepreneur, you're stuck because no one wants to take the risk on you, and you get stuck in this really sort of vicious loop, which is really, really hard to break through. So you just need your first champions, and you have to do your due diligence to make sure everything is safe and compliant. So it's a little bit of extra work you have to do because it's a precious resource that we consume. And it's just really hard to find people who want to take a risk. And water is conservative, it is extremely slow moving, and somehow resistant to change, in my opinion. Yeah. It's changing with PFAS and forever chemicals now, but it is a very conservative industry to change. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about how you said working with municipalities, and then you're saying risk takers, and those two sound like two very opposing sides. Have you seen, who have you seen that is, those kinds of risk takers in those partnerships?
I think it's mostly, customers who are unfortunately very heavily regulated and fined. So they don't have an option. So even if I call them champions, well, they are champions because they could also buy some more time with lobbying. They are thinking a little bit ahead and saying, this is not sustainable anymore. We are regulated, we are fined, and our business continuity is a threat now. So if you're a chip manufacturer, you need to use PFAS to produce chips and make money. And if somehow you get shut down because your different country got shut down, or the contamination they cause, now it affects your bottom line. So you do want to take a risk and you want to try something new, which, again, the good thing here is more data and more public pressure and the fear of regulations coming. So that's the market we find ourselves in, which is really lucky to be in. But I can also imagine if you're not in a very high-risk, regulatory-driven market, the customers are less likely to try a new water solution because the pain point is not so clear. So for us, it's an easier sell because they've tried stuff and they're regulated, and they just cannot not use those chemicals to make money. So it's an easier sell for us, but I can imagine it's not as easy in other sectors.
And it's also a reason why we chose to go for industry, because ultimately they have a problem to solve, whereas municipalities think, well, I already have some installations, I know what my cost base there is, so let me not experiment with new things. Whereas in businesses, they often, so we're talking, for example, to a methanol producer in Asia, which are located on an island. So they're currently taking water in from the island, the municipality, and the municipality is already telling them, you're taking too much water, so we're hindering our citizens here on the island. At the same time, they are not consuming all of the steam that they produce, so they're venting that to the atmosphere. Well, that's a slam dunk for us, because that's like free heat that we can take that currently goes to waste. We use that for our thermal desalination process, and we also help the citizens on the island so they retain more water in that municipal system. And I think that kind of approach probably is a way to solve for these challenges.
Yeah. And so these partnerships, like you talk more about, what other ones are important in this area.
Yeah, maybe I agree with you that maybe the public administration, mostly in the developed countries, are very resilient to change and very conservative. Okay, I agree, because In one hand, we are talking about critical supply. Okay, any advance should be very, very safe. Okay, we have to apply the principle of precaution. Okay, but I agree, and the type of contracts of the industry and this type of utilities companies is very, very conservative, and it's very difficult to implement new technologies based on the current contract. So my opinion is that if we modify the type of contracts more to a concession instead of a EPC and O&M contracts, the contractors should be able to implement new technologies because we will be only based on the results, okay, with our limits, the regulations, and our drivers will be the efficiency and the implementation of the new regulations. So we can apply new technologies in order to be more efficient, okay, or more clean. So this is one of the points that could be improved for applying new technologies here.
Yeah. Before I ask my next question, I just want to encourage y'all to submit questions that you may have for our panelists. I think there's a QR code or something. Tech is oddly not my thing, so there's some way for you to, but please do submit your questions for us. So as y'all are thinking about other things that you have, let's just talk about, like, you know, I know, Sophie, you are also interested in kind of like how are, you know, these new companies, how are y'all thinking about like your capital stack and things? Do you want to?
Yeah, we were you know, gossiping about capital stacks backstage before all of this, and as we've watched the broader climate space and industrial tech space mature, the depth and the breadth of the capital stack opportunities and investor types that are available to founders has sophisticated. And so we were chit-chatting about whether that has come into play as some of these folks have built their businesses. We find often with climate technology businesses that the best founders are able to layer over time, right, a diversity of capital sources. So they're not just funding these things with tons and tons of expensive equity, but rather they're able to bring in joint ventures or partnerships of different kinds, able to access facilities, maybe equipment. You pull in grants, you pull in debt in a non-problematic, clever fashion. You might do project finance, et cetera, and position yourself well for some kind of type of an exit, perhaps to PE or strategic or ideally IPO. And so I suppose a little bit leading, right, but we were talking about what role do strategic investors who bring a specific perspective on water, how have they played a role as you've built your businesses out? And likewise, what's the role of the broader deep tech innovation ecosystem in your companies? Sorry to accidentally steal the moderator.
This is awesome.
Yeah,
this is my other moderator.
Yeah, this is great. I'm coming for you next.
Okay.
Well, yes, likewise. And the role of government. Boom, there we go. We did it. Okay.
I'm happy to jump on that. So I completely agree with you. You need to layer that. You can't just go for equity. You also just can't go for grants. Someone needs to vet your business model. You can't just live on grants forever. But in the beginning, you also can't just go for equity as well, right? So you need to be smart about this. It's a very capital-intensive market, especially if you do hardware and water. Really capital-intensive. You will raise many rounds, so you need to be smart about that. So in our history so far, we're about 5 years old. We will be 5 years old next month, so almost there. So we raised close to $30 million US so far, and a third of that has really been from grants and subsidies, which we got in the first 2 years, and then we stopped, right? Because we needed that to prove we can go on the ground, we can do a POC, we can do a pilot quickly, and that was instrumental for us, not to give up equity in the first 2 years and have this non-dilutive, no strings attached funding to a disposal. But at the same time, you also realize you can really get stuck in the mindset of getting the next grant and doing another project instead of thinking, how do we scale this? So it's instrumental for us to also go and pitch and get the first term sheet out to do a first round. Even if we didn't need the cash, I just wanted the mindset in. I think it's really important as well to do that. But I'm also mindful that 1% of all the climate tech funding or less than that goes to water. So that's also a very staggering fact. If water is so critical to climate, and it gets 1% of all not the overall funding, the climate tech funding. It's a very sad stat. And it's also nice to see that we do have now generalist funds getting into water, deep tech funds getting into water, because if you look at just the water-specific funds, there's like, you can name them on your fingertips. They're like 5, 6 ones. That's it, water-specific ones. So I think it's good to layer them out with non-dilutive generalist funds, deep tech funds, who bring a new perspective how to scale, and from a different industry, maybe not water. And I think that's something we've been doing, and I think we'll continue to do. And there is a place for strategic investors when you want to go into a specific market and they have the experience and you've scaled up big enough, you have a secure IP portfolio, you can jump in then. But yeah, you just have to not do it too early, I think, in deep tech.
From your vantage working in the US government, how did you interact, if at all, with any of the technology businesses?
How did this happen?
Sorry.
Shortly, we definitely worked on both the regulatory side and the grant-making side, but a lot of it was, folks who were coming in who needed research permits to do work in, say, oceans or things like that we would see, and as we do our regulations, in the US, at least, part of it is thinking about what is economically achievable, and so we have to understand what technologies are out there, but a lot of it is the stuff that we already know about, RO, GAC, things like that. So the new technologies, it has to be big enough that we can start building it into our economic analysis as we do the regulations. But it's all part of all of this. But that is not your job, Sophie, but but thank you for asking. So I have, guys, I just figured out how to use this iPad, so I apologize. So let me go through some questions here. Do you think the water industry is the water industry something that needs investment by deep tech investors or water investors? We'll start there.
I would say it does, but I think, obviously I have more of a commercial role, so I'm a little bit biased, but I'd much rather have customers who are willing to take a chance and willing to have those first-of-a-kind installations than attracting more capital, because these could be famous last words, but I don't think that's where we have a problem right now. Getting customers to get over that initial hump. The amount of conversations that I have with people where they say, yeah, but can you point me to somewhere where this is proven? And I'm like, have you not listened to anything that I've said? We're a startup. The whole point is that we come up with something new and innovative. So no, we haven't proven it. Yes, on a demo scale, but now we're making it bigger. So that would be more my plea, maybe to have more people from industry, large corporates, who say, yeah, let's just take a risk on this. Let's innovate together.
I think yes. Also, we need more funding, but not also. We need to. We have the new regulations as driver. Okay, that's very good. And as I said, we need to modify a little bit the type of contracts in order to move the wheel. Okay, because you said we need technologies, proven technologies with references, and for that we need to start installing that. And for that we need a type of contract or type of regulation that move us to implement it. Yeah.
Great. Another question is, water scarcity is a globally regional problem. So the US, we have enough water on a national level, Texas, California, Nevada, Arizona, you can name the whole West. They don't. Europe has water, Southern Europe doesn't. So what are, on the business side, on the funding side, all of the innovation impacts on this regional aspect of the water issue?
From my understanding, the water scarcity is a global, local problem. Okay, it's not the same in any part of the world. And with the new technologies, we have the capability to adapt the solutions to each specific problem. So we need to take advantage of these capabilities to adapt each technology or each solution to the technology we have with desalination, solar desalination, with RO, destroying the PFAS or whatever. So we have to attack each problem, each local problem, with different technologies. Yeah.
I mean, for sure, it's a very regional and global problem, right? So when we talk about water scarcity caused by contamination, you can see there are hotspots all over Europe, in the US as well. You know, if you go to our airport defense site, that's a hotspot for forever chemical contamination. You can really, if you see a military defense site, you know there's a contamination problem that's very, very concentrated for these chemicals. In Europe, like Belgium, Netherlands, hotspots for PFAS contamination. When you look at the contamination map for forever chemicals, you do see hotspots where the concentrations can be 100 to 1,000,000 times higher than other places like in Switzerland, for example. But then again, in places like Switzerland, where we really celebrate the water quality, shockingly, Alps, for example, are a hotspot of forever chemical crisis because they're used in the PFAS. PFAS are used in the ski wax, for example. So anytime you ski, you're just spreading forever chemicals everywhere. So you have these local concentration places of these chemicals, which sometimes you wouldn't even think about. You think it's a pristine water quality, and you have that. And that creates a water scarcity because that whole region now is unusable for any kind of water use. It's toxic water. So in our case, very regional, very focused, and if not treated there, goes downstream and contaminates everything downstream. So then it becomes a global problem. So quite tricky. That's the thing with water. Water flows, right? So.
Yeah, and for us as well, so it's more of a go-to-market challenge in making sure that you find those hotspots where there's a need for our technology. So, for example, both of our demo plants are in the UAE, one in Dubai, one in Abu Dhabi. We are part of the OQ accelerator in Oman. We got investment from India. There are some projects that are brewing in the Caribbean, which is obviously very nice to go and visit, but also if you look at the rates, the tariffs that people pay for water there, it's mind-boggling. It's like €5 per cube of water, and it can even be higher. And the good thing is that with our technology, I know that I can slash that water cost by half. And we haven't even scaled so that we can drive our costs down further. So yes, it is a regional problem, and the advantage is that you then can also choose where you actually go first, because the need is biggest there, and you're competitive the most.
Yeah. So then, Sophie, what do you think from the VC community? Like, is water an industry-driven market, or should startups be focusing on communities, on regions as they're doing this?
As in building any business, you have to have someone pulling the need for your product through, right? And so I'm actually a fan of when you find a market that might look niche from the outside, but has intense affinity and very high willingness to pay as a place to start and to build and to scale down your costs and to essentially like joint venture in building this out, especially in businesses like this, where it's often reliant on partnerships and distribution partnerships all the way through. You're rarely kind of selling direct to customer or building out an entire new, independent go-to-market. So I like that, where it's an acute, local-oriented need. The founder personas tend to skew slightly more industrial and kind of collaborative, I suppose. There's this high-level framework, I suppose, in climate tech of disruptive, business models and transitioning business models, and I personally tend to gravitate more towards the transitionary ones that require this complicated layered capital stack and these partnerships. So yes to leveraging the acute need. As y'all were answering that question, I thought of in some studies around awareness of climate change, there's this interesting pattern where individuals experience a climate risk personally, locally. Maybe that's a flood or a fire or scarcer drinking water on their own doorstep in their own lives, and they know that they're feeling climate risk, climate changing, but they don't quite have the language to articulate that. And it's only when you start talking about the local risks that are climate related with your neighbor, and then with your community, and then with your town, and then with your state and country, so on, that you feel tied to the global, in this case, climate crisis. And I have to imagine that's very much the same for local water risks, right? So the local problem, perhaps we can figure out what are those words to use so that when people think of their risk, right, they feel more connected to this global open problem.
Yeah. Okay, in our last minute, my last rapid fire then. This has been super depressing and scary and crisis. So panelists, give us one thing that you're excited about in water that we can leave our audience with. So I'll start with Raúl and John.
Okay, I'm a water treatment passionate. I love to my work, and also my driver is just to apply the new technologies, try to solve or avoid the impact of water scarcity. Yeah.
Fajer.
For me, it definitely has to be the more and more data on the contamination scope and public awareness of the health effects, the scope, and the $100 billion per year to Europe annual costs of treatment.
Something that I'm currently super excited about is we just filed a patent 2 weeks ago where we take data centers from water users into water producers because they generate a lot of heat and it's low-grade waste heat. We can take that into our process and then make a data center actually a force for good wherever they land. And I'm really excited about that.
That's exciting.
That's cool. Open call for applications if I'm always looking for companies that are operating at the water energy nexus, or I suppose the water carbon nexus, essentially anywhere there's a real price on water. And we're looking specifically for companies that are taking large Earth observation models, applying it to water and climate risk, and layering AI on top of that. So in short, I think there's tons of data out there, new tools, and big risks to go solve for.
Well, y'all have made me very excited and optimistic about everything. And so I'm hoping everybody here is going to help us with our storytelling problem and help us engage and do more water work so we can build our water security. But thank you to our panelists today. And thank you.
Thank you.